The last thing Victoria Nolan expected when she stumbled into the dusty saloon in San Jose, California, on that sweltering afternoon in July 1878, was to become the object of a betting game among drunken miners. But life in the Wild West had a way of throwing the unexpected at a woman when she was already down on her luck. Victoria had arrived in San Jose 3 days prior with nothing but the clothes on her back, a worn carpet bag containing her mother's wedding ring and a few threadbare dresses, and exactly 12 cents to her name. The stagecoach journey from Missouri had taken everything she had saved, and the promised position as a schoolteacher that had lured her west had evaporated like morning dew when she discovered the letter of employment was a forgery penned by a man who had since disappeared with the school board's funds. She was 22 years old, alone in a territory that seemed determined to chew her up and spit her out, and the oppressive heat made everything feel twice as desperate. The Golden Eagle Saloon was not the sort of establishment a respectable woman entered, but Victoria was past the point of respectable. She needed work, any work, and the barkeep had mentioned they needed someone to serve drinks and clear tables. It was not the teaching position she had dreamed of, but dreams did not fill an empty stomach or pay for a roof over one's head. She pushed through the swinging doors, and immediately every eye in the dim interior turned toward her. "Well, well, well," drawled a heavy-set man with a thick black beard, his words slurred with whiskey. "Looks like we got ourselves a fresh dove wandering in." Victoria straightened her spine and approached the bar, determined to ignore the stares burning into her back. "I'm looking for Mr. Donovan. I was told he might have employment available." Donovan stepped out, the bartender said, eyeing her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. He was a thin man with graying hair and kind eyes that seemed out of place in such rough surroundings. "Might be back in an hour, might be back tomorrow. You can wait if you want." She had nowhere else to go, so she nodded and moved to an empty table in the corner, hoping to make herself as inconspicuous as possible. The men in the saloon had other ideas. "I bet $5 I can get her to dance with me," announced the bearded man, slamming his glass on the table hard enough to make the cards jump. "Dance?" laughed another man, this one rail thin with a scar across his cheek. "Hell, Jake, I bet $10 I can get her to do more than dance." Victoria felt her face flush hot, but she kept her eyes fixed on the scarred tabletop in front of her, trying to pretend she could not hear them. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a caged bird. "20 says she is married and her husband's coming through that door any minute," said a third voice, followed by a chorus of rough laughter. "Look at her hands, no ring. She is free for the taking." The bets escalated, each man trying to outdo the others with increasingly vulgar suggestions and higher stakes. Victoria's hands trembled in her lap. She wanted to run, but where would she go? The street outside was not any safer, and she still needed that job if it existed. The bartender looked uncomfortable but made no move to intervene. He had probably seen this sort of thing 100 times before. $50 says I can have her upstairs in the back room within the hour, Jake declared, rising from his chair with an unsteady swagger. "You are on," said the scarred man, and suddenly there were hands reaching for money, more bets being placed, and Jake was walking toward her table with the confidence of a man who had never been told no in his life. Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. "I do not know what game you gentlemen think you are playing, but I am not interested in participating." "Oh, do not be like that, darling," Jake said, reaching for her arm. "Just a friendly wager. You might even enjoy yourself." She jerked away from his grasp, but her back was against the wall now, literally and figuratively. The other men had formed a loose circle, cutting off her escape route to the door. The bartender was conspicuously polishing glasses and looking anywhere but at the scene unfolding. "Leave me alone," Victoria said, hating how her voice shook. "I just came here looking for honest work." "Oh, we will give you honest work, sweetheart," the scarred man said, eliciting another round of laughter from the crowd. The door to the saloon swung open with such force that it banged against the interior wall, and the laughter died as though someone had snuffed out a candle. The man who entered had to duck slightly to clear the doorframe, and when he straightened to his full height, he seemed to fill the entire room with his presence. He was massive, well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they strained against his buckskin shirt. His arms were thick with muscle, visible even beneath the leather and fabric, and his hands looked like they could snap a man's neck without much effort. Dark brown hair fell past his shoulders, tied back loosely with a strip of rawhide, and a full beard covered the lower half of his face, though it did nothing to hide the hard set of his jaw. His eyes, a startling pale blue against his sun-darkened skin, swept the room with the cold assessment of a predator evaluating potential threats. This was Owen Kincaid, though Victoria did not know his name yet. All she knew was that every man in that saloon had suddenly found something fascinating about the floor. Owen had come down from his cabin in the Sierra Nevada foothills for supplies, a trip he made once every few months when he ran low on coffee, salt, and ammunition. He preferred the solitude of the mountains to the crowded chaos of town, preferred the company of deer and eagles to the kind of men who congregated in saloons. But he needed those supplies, and San Jose was the closest settlement to his territory. He had planned to conduct his business quickly and return to his mountain before nightfall, but the scene he had walked in on changed those plans immediately. He took in the situation with a single glance. The young woman backed into a corner, the circle of men surrounding her like wolves around a wounded doe, the betting money still scattered across the table. His jaw tightened. "Game is over," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate from deep in his chest. Jake, emboldened by whiskey and the presence of his friends, turned to face the newcomer. "This is none of your concern, stranger. We are just having a bit of fun." "Does the lady look like she's having fun?" Owen asked, taking a step forward. The floorboards creaked under his weight. Jake glanced back at Victoria, who was pressed against the wall with her arms wrapped protectively around herself, her face pale except for 2 bright spots of color on her cheeks. Even Jake could not pretend she was enjoying herself, but pride and alcohol made him stupid. "She's in a saloon. She knows what that means." "What I know," Owen said, his voice dropping even lower, "is that you have about 3 seconds to step away from her before I make you step away." The scarred man laughed nervously. "You against all of us? Those are bad odds, friend." Owen's pale eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made the laughter die in his throat. "I have faced down grizzly bears that would eat you for breakfast. You think I am worried about a bunch of drunks who prey on women?" The men exchanged glances, trying to decide if this mountain man was bluffing. Owen took another step forward, and suddenly the circle began to break apart. The scarred man backed toward the bar. Another man found urgent business outside. Jake held his ground for a moment longer, his face flushing red with humiliation and anger. "We had money on the table," he protested. "Then pick it up and leave," Owen said. "Unless you want to explain to the sheriff why you were running a betting pool on harassing a woman. I'm sure he would find that interesting." That did it. Jake snatched his money from the table and stalked toward the door, followed quickly by the rest of his cohorts. Within moments, the saloon had cleared out except for Owen, Victoria, and the bartender, who looked relieved enough to kiss the mountain man's boots. Owen turned to Victoria, and his expression softened slightly, though he was still an intimidating figure at full height. "You all right, miss?" Victoria realized she had been holding her breath. She released it slowly, her legs suddenly feeling like they might give out. "Yes, thank you. I do not know what would have happened if you had not arrived when you did." "Nothing good," Owen said bluntly. He glanced at the bartender. "You got something stronger than water back there? Lady looks like she could use it." The bartender poured a small glass of brandy and brought it over, setting it on the table. Victoria sank back into her chair, no longer caring what anyone thought of a woman drinking hard liquor in a saloon. Her hands shook so badly she almost spilled it on the first sip, but the warmth that spread through her chest helped settle her nerves. Owen pulled out the chair across from her and sat, though even seated he was an imposing presence. Up close, Victoria could see the details she had missed in those first chaotic moments, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting in the sun, the way his hands rested on the table with careful stillness, as though he was very aware of his own strength and deliberately keeping it in check. "What's a woman like you doing in a place like this?" he asked, not unkindly. Victoria bristled slightly at the question, her pride stinging. "A woman like me. Educated. Respectable. Not the type who usually walks into the Golden Eagle looking for work." She took another sip of brandy before answering. "I came to San Jose to teach school. The position I was promised turned out to be a fraud. I have no money to return home and I need to eat. I thought perhaps I could clear tables, wash dishes, something until I could save enough for another option." Owen studied her for a long moment, his pale blue eyes seeing more than she was comfortable with. You have family back east? Not anymore. My mother passed last winter. I have an aunt in St. Louis, but we are not close. When the teaching position was offered, it seemed like Providence, a chance to start fresh somewhere new. She laughed bitterly. I suppose I should have known better than to trust a letter from a stranger. Where are you staying? A boarding house on 3rd Street, Mrs. Patterson's establishment. She's given me until the end of the week to pay what I owe or vacate the room. Owen was quiet for another moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he said something that changed both of their lives. I have a proposition for you. Victoria stiffened, her eyes flashing with sudden anger. If you think I am so desperate that I would— Not that kind of proposition, Owen interrupted, his voice firm but not harsh. Hear me out before you get your back up. She subsided, though her posture remained defensive. Very well. I live alone up in the mountains, about a day's ride from here. Good land, plenty of water, game for hunting, and space for farming if a man had the inclination. I built the cabin myself 5 years ago when I got tired of dealing with crowds and noise and all the complications that come with living around other people. He paused, choosing his words carefully. It is a good life, but it is a lonely one. I had not much minded the loneliness until recently, but watching what just happened here, seeing those men treat you like you were nothing but a prize to be won in their ugly game, it made me think about how a woman alone in this world does not have many good options. What exactly are you proposing? Victoria asked warily. Marriage, Owen said simply. Not the kind where I'm expecting anything you are not willing to give. I'm talking about my name, my protection, and a roof over your head. In return, you would have a home, safety, and the legal protection that comes with being a married woman. Whatever else develops between us or does not develop would be up to you. Victoria stared at him, certain she must have misheard. You're asking me to marry you? We met 5 minutes ago. I know what I saw when I walked in that door. I saw a woman in trouble who deserves better than what this town was about to give her. I also know what I need, which is a partner. Someone to share the burden of living in wild country. I'm offering you a choice instead of letting those men take your choices away. You do not even know me, Victoria protested, though something in her chest was fluttering with an emotion she could not quite name. Hope, maybe, or just desperate relief at being offered a lifeline. I know you are brave enough to walk into a rough saloon looking for honest work. I know you are educated. I know you came all the way across the country alone because you wanted something better for yourself. That's more than most people know about their spouses on their wedding day, Owen said. And for what it is worth, you would get to know me too before making any decisions about what happens after the wedding. I'm not asking you to share my bed unless you want to. I'm asking you to share my name and my home. Victoria's mind was racing. This was insane. You did not marry a stranger, no matter how compelling his eyes or how safe he made you feel when he cleared a room full of threatening men with nothing but his presence. But what were her alternatives? Return to the boarding house and wait until Mrs. Patterson threw her out. Try to find work in a town that had already shown her exactly how it treated unattached women. Attempt to earn enough money for passage back east, where she had nothing waiting for her but memories, and an aunt who had made it clear Victoria was not welcome. I need time to think, she said finally. Owen nodded, as though he had expected nothing less. Fair enough. I am staying at the livery stable tonight with my horses. I will be leaving tomorrow at dawn. If you decide you want to take me up on the offer, meet me there before sunrise. If you do not show, I will understand, and I wish you the best of luck. He stood, his chair scraping against the floor, and pulled a small leather pouch from his belt. He counted out several coins and set them on the table in front of her. That should cover your boarding house debt and a few meals. Consider it payment for the trouble those men caused you. I cannot take your money, Victoria protested, even as her pride warred with her practicality. You can and you will, Owen said, his tone brooking no argument. I do not hold with men treating women the way those jackals were treating you, and I do not hold with leaving someone in need when I have the means to help. Take the money. If you decide not to marry me, use it to buy yourself some time to figure out your next move. Before she could argue further, he turned and walked out of the saloon, ducking through the doorway and disappearing into the bright afternoon sunlight. Victoria sat alone at the table, staring at the coins he had left behind, and trying to process everything that had just happened. The bartender approached cautiously. "Owen Kincaid is a good man, miss. Hard as granite and twice as tough, but honorable. I have known him for 5 years, and I have never seen him break his word or treat anyone unfairly. If he offered you his protection, you can trust it is genuine." "You know him?" "Everyone in San Jose knows of him, even if they do not know him personally. He comes down from his mountain a few times a year for supplies. Keeps to himself mostly, but there are stories. He once tracked a group of bandits for 3 days after they robbed a family passing through. Brought them back alive to stand trial when most men would have just shot them. Another time, he helped search for a child who wandered off during a blizzard. Found the boy half frozen and carried him 5 miles back to town on his shoulders." The bartender shrugged. "He's a good man in a land where good men are hard to come by." Victoria gathered the coins slowly, wrapping them in her handkerchief and tucking them into her pocket. Her mind was still reeling, but somewhere beneath the shock, a decision was beginning to form. She walked back to the boarding house in a daze, barely noticing the heat or the dust or the curious stares from passers-by. Mrs. Patterson was waiting in the parlor, her thin face pinched with disapproval. "I heard you were at the Golden Eagle," the older woman said. "I run a respectable establishment, Miss Nolan. I cannot have boarders who frequent such places." "I was looking for employment," Victoria replied, too exhausted to muster much indignation. "And I have your money." She counted out the coins Owen had given her, watching Mrs. Patterson's expression shift from disapproval to surprise to grudging acceptance. With her debt paid, Victoria climbed the stairs to her small room and collapsed on the narrow bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling. Marriage to a stranger. It was mad, completely mad, but was it any madder than what her life had become? She had already traveled across half a continent based on a stranger's letter that turned out to be a lie. She had already lost everything familiar and found herself alone in a place where men thought they could make bets over her like she was a horse at auction. What did she have to lose by accepting Owen Kincaid's offer? Her life, potentially, whispered a cautious voice in her head. He could be anyone. He could be taking you to that mountain cabin to do terrible things. But another voice, stronger and more insistent, reminded her of the way he had walked into that saloon and ended the betting game without raising his voice or his fists, reminded her of how he had softened when he spoke to her, how he had given her money without expecting anything in return, how he had offered her a choice when she had none. The bartender's words echoed in her mind. He is a good man in a land where good men are hard to come by. Victoria did not sleep much that night. She lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the town outside her window, weighing her options over and over until her head ached. By the time the first gray light of dawn began to filter through the thin curtains, she had made her decision. She washed her face in the basin, pinned her dark hair into a simple bun, and put on her least worn dress, a faded blue calico that had been her Sunday best back in Missouri. She packed her few belongings into her carpet bag, left a note for Mrs. Patterson saying she would not be returning, and walked through the quiet streets to the livery stable. Owen was there, as he had promised, saddling a massive black horse that looked like it had mountain blood in its veins. A second horse, a sturdy bay mare, was already packed with supplies. He glanced up as Victoria approached, and something that might have been relief flashed across his face before his expression settled back into calm neutrality. "You came," he said. "I came," Victoria confirmed, her voice steadier than she felt. "If your offer still stands, I would like to accept it." Owen nodded slowly. "It stands. We can ride to the mission and have Father Miguel perform the ceremony. He is used to unconventional requests." "What about a marriage license?" Victoria asked, suddenly aware of all the practical details she had not considered in the long night. "We will stop at the county office on the way. It will not take long." Everything happened with surprising efficiency after that. The county clerk was still yawning when they arrived at his office, but he processed the paperwork without comment, probably accustomed to hasty marriages in a frontier town. Father Miguel at Mission San Jose was equally unfazed, though he did pull Victoria aside before the ceremony. Are you certain about this, my child?" he asked gently, his weathered face kind with concern. "Marriage is a sacred bond, not something to be entered into lightly." "I am certain," Victoria said, and realized as she spoke that it was true. She was terrified, yes, but also certain in a way she had not felt about anything since her mother died. He is offering me a life, Father. A real life, not just survival. I would be a fool not to take it. The ceremony was brief and simple, conducted in the small chapel with its whitewashed walls and rough wooden pews. Owen's voice was steady as he spoke his vows, his pale blue eyes never leaving Victoria's face. When it came time for her vows, Victoria found her voice was steady too, the words feeling more real than she had expected. Father Miguel blessed them, and then Owen was sliding a plain gold band onto her finger, a ring he had apparently purchased while she was packing her belongings that morning. It was a simple thing, but it fit perfectly, warm and solid against her skin. "You may kiss the bride," Father Miguel said with a small smile. Owen looked at Victoria, a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, and he leaned down, pressing a chaste kiss to her lips. It was brief, almost formal, but Victoria felt the warmth of it all the way down to her toes. And just like that, she was married. Victoria Kincaid. The name felt strange on her tongue when she signed the marriage certificate, but not unpleasant. They rode out of San Jose an hour later, heading into the foothills with the summer sun climbing higher in a cloudless sky. Owen set an easy pace, mindful of the fact that Victoria was not accustomed to long hours in the saddle. He had given her the bay mare, which had a gentle disposition and a smooth gait. "Her name is Rosie," Owen said as they rode. "She belonged to a family passing through last year. They sold her to me when they needed money for supplies. She's a good horse, steady and smart." "She's lovely," Victoria said, patting the mare's neck. "I must confess I am not much of a rider. We had a cart horse back in Missouri, but I rarely rode." "You will learn. The mountains require it." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the clopping of hooves on the hard-packed trail and the occasional call of a bird. Victoria studied her new husband when she thought he was not looking. In the full light of day, he was even more imposing than he had seemed in the dim saloon. His shoulders were impossibly broad, his arms corded with muscle from years of hard physical labor. His hands on the reins were large and capable, scarred from countless small injuries. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who had carved a life out of wilderness through sheer strength and determination. "Tell me about your cabin," Victoria said finally, needing to break the silence. Owen glanced at her, and his expression softened slightly. "It sits in a valley between two ridges, about 3,000 feet up. There is a creek that runs year-round, fed by snowmelt in the spring. The cabin is 2 rooms, one for living and cooking, one for sleeping. There is a loft above for storage. I have a root cellar for keeping food cool, a smokehouse for meat, and a small barn for the horses. The land is good. I have a vegetable garden, some chickens, and I hunt for most of the meat. In winter we get snowed in for weeks at a time, but I keep enough supplies laid in that it is never a hardship." "It sounds isolated," Victoria said carefully. "It is. That is why I built there. But if you need company, there's a small settlement about 6 miles east. 3 families, including a widow named Sarah Chen, who would probably welcome another woman to talk to. And San Jose is a day's ride if we need supplies or a doctor." "Do you go to the settlement often?" "Not often, maybe once a month to trade. Sarah Chen is a good woman, though. Her husband died in a mining accident 4 years ago. She stayed and runs a trading post now. She will like you." They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of dried beef and hard biscuit that Owen produced from his saddlebags. Victoria was sore and dusty and more tired than she wanted to admit, but she was also aware of a strange sense of contentment. The air was cleaner up here, scented with pine and wildflowers. The sky seemed bigger somehow, stretching endlessly above them in a brilliant blue expanse. And Owen, despite his size and his reputation, made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since before her mother died. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said as they prepared to mount up again. "Of course." "Why did you really offer to marry me? You said you were lonely, but you have lived alone for 5 years. Why now? Why me?" Owen was quiet for a long moment, checking Rosie's saddle straps with more attention than necessary. Finally, he said, "My mother died when I was 15. My father was a hard man, a drunk who blamed everyone else for his misfortunes. I left home as soon as I was old enough to make my own way. I spent years drifting, doing whatever work I could find, logging, mining, scouting for the army. I saw a lot of ugly things in those years, men doing terrible things to each other and to anyone weaker than themselves. When I had saved enough money, I went as far from civilization as I could and built that cabin, thinking I could leave all that ugliness behind. He paused, running a hand over his horse's neck. But loneliness has a way of creeping up on you. And watching those men treat you like you were nothing but a prize to be won, it reminded me of all the things I hate about people. But it also reminded me that there are good people in the world too. People worth protecting. You walked into that saloon looking for honest work with your head held high, even though you were scared. That took courage. I respect courage. He met her eyes directly. So I offered you a choice because I could, and because you deserved one, and maybe because I hoped you might choose me. Victoria felt her throat tighten with emotion. Thank you for your honesty. I will always be honest with you, Owen said. That is a promise. They reached the cabin just before sunset. It was exactly as Owen had described, a sturdy log structure nestled in a valley between two pine-covered ridges, with a creek running silver in the fading light. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, and Victoria realized with surprise that the cabin must have been warm when they left that morning. Owen followed her gaze and explained, I banked the fire before I left yesterday. It should still be going. He helped her dismount, his hands steadying her when her legs wobbled after the long ride. Then he led both horses to the barn, a small but well-built structure, and began the process of unsaddling and grooming them, while Victoria stood uncertainly in the yard, unsure what to do with herself. When Owen emerged from the barn, he found her still standing in the same spot, her carpet bag clutched in both hands. Something in his expression softened. Come inside, he said gently. Let me show you your home. The interior of the cabin was plain but clean, furnished with handmade furniture that showed considerable skill in its construction. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, with a cast-iron stove for cooking nearby. Shelves lined another wall, holding dishes, cooking implements, and a surprising number of books. A sturdy table with 2 chairs sat in the center of the room, and 2 comfortable-looking chairs flanked the fireplace. Everything was orderly and well-maintained, the home of a man who took pride in his surroundings. Owen opened the door to the second room, revealing a large bed covered with quilts, a wardrobe, and a small dresser. This is the bedroom. You will sleep here. I will take the loft. Victoria turned to him in surprise. You do not have to do that. You said 2 rooms. I assumed one was yours. I said I was not expecting you to share my bed unless you wanted to, Owen reminded her. The loft is comfortable enough. I have slept there before. Owen, this is your home. I cannot take your bedroom. You are my wife, he said firmly. This is your home now too, and I am not about to make you sleep in a loft when there's a perfectly good bed right here. The discussion is over. Victoria wanted to argue, but the exhaustion of the long day was catching up with her, and the bed did look incredibly inviting. She nodded slowly. Thank you. Owen showed her where he kept fresh water for washing, the privy out back, and the various supplies in the cabin. Then he excused himself to tend to the chickens and check his snares, while Victoria unpacked her meager belongings and tried to wrap her mind around the fact that this was her life now. She was married to a mountain man she had met yesterday, living in a cabin miles from anywhere. It was so far from the life she had imagined for herself that it almost seemed like a dream. But when she looked down at the gold ring on her finger, solid and real, she knew it was no dream. Owen returned an hour later with 3 rabbits and a basket of eggs. He skinned and cleaned the rabbits with efficient movements, while Victoria watched, slightly queasy but also fascinated by the casual competence of his actions. Then he set about preparing a meal, moving around the kitchen area with the ease of long practice. I am a decent cook, Victoria offered. I should be doing this. You are exhausted, Owen said without looking up from the pot he was stirring. There will be plenty of time for you to take over the cooking if you want to. Tonight you rest. The meal was simple but good. Rabbit stew with vegetables from the garden, fresh biscuits cooked in a Dutch oven in the fireplace, and strong coffee. They ate at the table, and Owen asked her questions about her life before San Jose. She told him about growing up in Missouri, her father who had died in the war, her mother who had never quite recovered from his loss, the quiet years of keeping house and dreaming of something more. In turn, Owen told her more about his years of drifting, the decision to build his cabin, the rhythms of his life in the mountains. "It is hard work," he said honestly, "especially in winter, and it is lonely. But it is mine. No one tells me what to do or how to live. No one looks at me and sees just another pair of hands for hire. Up here, I am my own man." "I understand that," Victoria said softly. "I think that is what I was looking for when I left Missouri. A place where I could be my own woman, not just someone's daughter or spinster aunt." "You have that here," Owen said. "I meant what I said about the marriage. You are free to make your own choices. If you want to help with the work, I would welcome it. If you want to spend your days reading or gardening or anything else, that is your right. This is not an arrangement where I expect you to be my servant." "What do you expect?" Victoria asked directly. Owen met her eyes across the table. "Honesty, respect, and maybe, in time, companionship, the kind that goes deeper than just sharing a roof. But that last part is not a demand, just a hope." Victoria felt her cheeks warm, but she did not look away. "I can promise honesty and respect. The rest, we will see. That is all I ask." They cleaned up the meal together, working in companionable silence. Then Owen showed Victoria how to bank the fire for the night and made sure she had everything she needed before climbing the ladder to the loft. She heard him moving around above her head, the creak of floorboards and the rustle of blankets, and then the cabin fell quiet except for the pop and hiss of the dying fire. Victoria changed into her nightgown and climbed into the bed, sinking into the deep mattress stuffed with what felt like feathers or down. It was more comfortable than any bed she had slept in for months, and despite the strangeness of her situation, she felt herself drifting toward sleep almost immediately. Her last conscious thought was that she had made the right choice. Whatever the future held, she was safe here, protected. And maybe, just maybe, she had found something worth holding on to. The next few weeks passed in a blur of new routines and gradual adjustments. Victoria threw herself into learning the rhythms of life in the mountains, determined to be a partner rather than a burden. Owen taught her how to tend the chickens, collect eggs, and maintain the vegetable garden. He showed her which plants in the forest were edible and which were poisonous, how to read the weather in the clouds and the behavior of animals, how to preserve meat and vegetables for the long winter ahead. She proved to be a quick study, and Owen found himself impressed by her willingness to tackle even the dirtiest or most difficult tasks without complaint. She helped him repair the fence around the garden when a deer broke through. She learned to shoot his rifle, starting with targets and gradually improving until she could hit a rabbit at 50 yards. She took over most of the cooking and discovered that she enjoyed experimenting with wild herbs and game, creating meals that were better than anything Owen had eaten in years. In turn, Victoria found herself falling into the rhythm of mountain life more easily than she had expected. The isolation that had worried her at first became a source of peace. There was something deeply satisfying about physical work, about seeing the direct results of her efforts in a well-tended garden or a perfectly cooked meal or a cabin that gleamed with cleanliness. And Owen, despite his gruff exterior, was surprisingly easy to live with. He was patient with her mistakes, generous with his praise when she succeeded, and respectful of her space in a way that made her feel valued rather than merely tolerated. They talked too, long conversations in the evenings after the work was done. Owen had more books than Victoria had expected, a collection that ranged from practical manuals on farming and animal husbandry to poetry and philosophy. He had taught himself to read as a teenager, driven by a hunger for knowledge that his difficult childhood had not extinguished. They took turns reading aloud to each other, and Victoria discovered that Owen had a voice perfectly suited for poetry, deep and resonant and surprisingly expressive. One evening, about a month after their marriage, they were sitting by the fire after dinner when Victoria looked up from the shirt she was mending and said, "I owe you an apology." Owen glanced at her in surprise. "For what?" "I've been thinking about that day in the saloon. When you offered to marry me, I accepted because I was desperate and afraid. I did not think about what you might be getting out of the arrangement. I just grabbed onto the lifeline you offered, without considering whether it was fair to you." Victoria. "Please let me finish," she said, setting down her mending. "You have been nothing but kind and generous since we married. You have given me a home, safety, and respect. You have been patient with my ignorance and supportive of my efforts to learn. And in return, what have you gotten? A wife who does not share your bed, who still barely knows you, who is probably more work than help most of the time." Owen leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression serious. "Do you want to know what I have gotten? I've gotten someone to talk to in the evenings, someone who laughs at my terrible jokes and challenges my opinions on poetry, and makes this cabin feel like a home instead of just a place to sleep. I have gotten a partner who is not afraid of hard work, who faces every challenge with courage and determination. I have gotten a wife who is beautiful and smart and stronger than she gives herself credit for." He paused, his pale blue eyes holding hers. "So no, Victoria. You do not owe me an apology. You have given me more than you know." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "You think I am beautiful?" "I think you are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen," Owen said simply. "I thought so the moment I saw you in that saloon, and I think so even more now that I know you." The air between them felt charged with something new, something that had been building quietly for weeks. Victoria set her mending aside and stood, crossing the small distance between her chair and Owen's. He looked up at her, a question in his eyes, and she answered it by leaning down and kissing him. It was different from the chaste kiss they had shared at their wedding. This kiss was deeper, full of promise and possibility. Owen's arms came up to circle her waist, and Victoria let herself sink into his embrace, marveling at the strength in his body and the gentleness of his touch. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victoria rested her forehead against his. "I want to be your wife," she whispered, "truly your wife in every way." "Are you sure?" Owen asked, his voice rough. "I do not want you to feel obligated." "I am sure," Victoria said firmly. "I have been sure for days now, but I did not know how to say it. I want this, Owen. I want you." He stood, lifting her easily in his arms, and carried her to the bedroom. What followed was tender and passionate, a coming together that felt inevitable and right. Owen was careful with her, aware of his strength and her inexperience, and Victoria gave herself to him with a trust that she had not felt capable of just a few weeks ago. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed, Victoria's head resting on Owen's broad chest, his arm wrapped protectively around her. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, and feel the rise and fall of his breathing. I did not expect this," she said softly. "When I agreed to marry you, I thought it would be a practical arrangement. I never imagined I would fall in love with you." Owen's arm tightened around her. "You love me?" Victoria lifted her head to look at him, seeing the vulnerability in his expression. "I do. I love you, Owen Kincaid, your strength and your kindness and your terrible jokes. I love the life we are building together and the man you are. I love you." "I love you too," Owen said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have loved you since you walked into that livery stable at dawn and chose me over every other option you might have had. You are brave and beautiful and perfect, and I will spend every day of my life proving that you made the right choice." They made love again, slower this time, savoring each touch and kiss, and when they finally fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, both of them were smiling. The months that followed were the happiest of Victoria's life. Summer gave way to autumn, and the mountains transformed into a riot of gold and crimson. Owen took her hunting, teaching her to track deer and read the signs of the forest. They worked together to harvest the garden and preserve food for winter, filling the root cellar with potatoes, carrots, and turnips, and lining the smokehouse with cured meat. Victoria learned to churn butter from the milk of the goat Owen purchased from Sarah Chen, and she experimented with making cheese with varying degrees of success. They visited the settlement once a month, and Victoria discovered that Owen had been right about Sarah Chen. The widow was a few years older than Victoria, with a quick smile and a sharp wit. Her trading post was the hub of the small community, and she welcomed Victoria with open arms. It is about time Owen found himself a wife," Sarah said the first time they met, looking Victoria up and down with approval. "I was starting to think he planned to turn into a hermit permanently. You are good for him. I can see it already." "He is good for me too," Victoria said, surprising herself with how true the words felt. Through Sarah, Victoria met the other families in the settlement, the Johnsons, who had 5 children ranging from toddler to teenager, the Martinezes, who ran a small ranch, and old Henry Porter, a former gold prospector who now spent his days whittling and telling tall tales. They were good people, hard-working and honest, and they accepted Victoria as one of their own without question. Winter came early that year, with the first snow falling in late October. Owen had been right about getting snowed in. By December, the drifts were so deep that travel was impossible, and the cabin became their entire world. But instead of feeling trapped, Victoria found the enforced isolation strangely peaceful. They spent their days tending to necessary chores and their evenings by the fire, reading, talking, and making love. Owen carved her a beautiful rocking chair for Christmas, and Victoria knitted him a thick sweater and a pair of warm socks. They were simple gifts, made precious by the love behind them. It was in late January, during a brief thaw, that Victoria realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but the confirmation came with a mixture of joy and terror. She told Owen that evening after dinner, watching his face carefully for his reaction. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor. My monthly courses have not come in 2 months, and I have been sick every morning for the past week." Owen was quiet for a long moment, and Victoria felt her heart sink. Then he broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen on his face, crossed the room in 2 strides, and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. "We are going to have a baby," he said, setting her down, but keeping his hands on her waist. "Victoria, we are going to be parents." "You are happy about this?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy? I am more than happy. I am thrilled. Terrified, but thrilled." He sobered slightly. "Are you happy?" "Yes," Victoria said, realizing as she spoke that it was completely true. "Yes, I am happy. Scared, but happy." "We will need to get you to a doctor," Owen said, his practical nature reasserting itself. "Make sure everything is progressing as it should, and we will need supplies, baby clothes, diapers, all the things an infant needs." "Not until the snow clears," Victoria said. "We have time. The baby will not come until summer." They spent the rest of the winter preparing for the new arrival. Owen built a beautiful cradle from pine and cedar, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. Victoria sewed tiny clothes from fabric Sarah had traded them and knitted impossibly small booties. They talked about names and wondered whether they would have a son or a daughter. Owen admitted he did not care which, as long as both mother and child came through the birth healthy. Spring arrived in a rush of melting snow and rushing water. As soon as the trails were passable, Owen took Victoria to San Jose to see the doctor, a gruff but competent man who examined her thoroughly and pronounced her in excellent health. "The baby should come in late June or early July," he said. "You are strong and healthy, Mrs. Kincaid. I see no reason to expect complications, but I would recommend having a midwife present for the birth, especially since this is your first child." Owen hired a midwife on the spot, a cheerful woman named Mrs. O'Brien, who agreed to come stay with them for the month surrounding Victoria's due date. They returned to the cabin laden with supplies and feeling more prepared for what was to come. The baby, a boy, arrived on a hot July afternoon after 12 hours of labor. Owen paced the main room while Mrs. O'Brien tended to Victoria, and when he finally heard the thin wail of a newborn, he nearly knocked over the door in his haste to get to his wife. Victoria was exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Meet your son," she said, her voice hoarse but filled with wonder. Owen took the baby with shaking hands, cradling him against his broad chest with surprising gentleness. The infant was impossibly small, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn blue like his father's. He looked up at Owen with unfocused eyes, and Owen felt something in his chest crack open. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I am your father, and I promise to protect you and love you for as long as I live." "What should we name him?" Victoria asked. They had discussed names at length during the pregnancy, but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son, Owen said, "What about James, after your father?" Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "You remembered." "Of course I remembered. You said he was a good man who died too young. It would honor his memory." "James Kincaid," Victoria said, testing the name. "Yes, it is perfect." Mrs. O'Brien stayed for 2 weeks, making sure both mother and baby were thriving before she returned to San Jose. Sarah Chen and the other settlement families visited, bringing gifts and offering congratulations. The Johnsons brought a collection of their children's outgrown clothes. The Martinezes brought a lamb for butchering. Henry Porter carved a set of wooden toys that James would not be able to use for years, but were beautiful nonetheless. Life settled into a new rhythm, one centered around the needs of a newborn. Victoria and Owen took turns walking the floor with James when he cried at night. They marveled at every milestone: his first smile, the first time he rolled over, the day he reached out and grabbed Owen's finger with his tiny hand. "I never knew I could love someone this much," Owen said one evening, watching James sleep in his cradle. "You two are my entire world." "And you are ours," Victoria replied, leaning against his shoulder. "I think about that day in the saloon sometimes, how lost and scared I was, how those men were treating me like I was nothing. And then you walked in and changed everything. You gave me a life I never dreamed I could have. You gave me love and safety, and now this beautiful child. How do I ever thank you for that?" "You already have," Owen said, turning to kiss her softly. "Every day you thank me just by being here, by choosing me, by loving me. That is more than I ever hoped for." James grew quickly, as babies do. By his first birthday, he was walking and getting into everything, his curiosity about the world around him endless. Owen built him a small toy box to hold the growing collection of playthings. Victoria taught him simple words and songs. They were happy, the three of them, in their mountain cabin. When James was 2, Victoria discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news was met with excitement rather than fear. They knew what to expect, and they welcomed the prospect of expanding their family. Their daughter was born on a cool autumn morning, arriving much faster than her brother had. She had Victoria's dark hair and Owen's blue eyes, and she screamed with impressive volume from the moment she drew her first breath. "She has a strong set of lungs," Mrs. O'Brien said approvingly. "This one will keep you on your toes." They named her Caroline, after Owen's mother, the woman he had barely known but always remembered with love. Caroline was indeed strong-willed, demanding attention and refusing to be ignored. She kept them up at night with her cries and exhausted them with her endless energy during the day. But she was also affectionate and quick to smile, and both Owen and Victoria were completely besotted with her. James, for his part, was fascinated by his little sister. He wanted to help with everything, from diaper changes to feeding, and he would sit by her cradle for hours, talking to her in his toddler babble and showing her his toys. The years passed, marked by the changing of seasons and the growth of their children. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved to help his father with outdoor work and who read every book in the cabin multiple times. Caroline was bold and adventurous, climbing trees and exploring the forest with fearless enthusiasm that gave her parents equal parts pride and heart attacks. When James was 8 and Caroline was 6, Victoria gave birth to another son, whom they named Thomas. He was a calm, easy baby who seemed content to watch the world go by with wide, wondering eyes. And 3 years after Thomas came another daughter, Margaret, who had her mother's temperament and her father's quiet strength. The cabin, which had once seemed spacious, grew crowded. Owen built an addition, expanding the living space and adding another bedroom so the children were not all crammed into the loft. He built a larger table so they could all eat together. He constructed a schoolroom of sorts where Victoria could teach the children to read and write and do arithmetic. Life was full and busy and sometimes chaotic, but it was also rich with love. Owen watched his children grow with a pride that never faded, and Victoria marveled daily at the family they had created together. "Do you ever regret it?" Owen asked her one evening after the children were finally asleep. They were sitting by the fire as they had done thousands of times before, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "Regret what?" Victoria asked. "Marrying me. This life. I know it is not what you imagined for yourself when you left Missouri. You wanted to be a teacher in a proper school, to live in a town with society and culture and all the things a woman like you deserved." Victoria turned to look at him, surprised. "Owen Kincaid, I have never regretted marrying you. Not for one single moment. Yes, this is not the life I imagined, but it is so much better. I did not know what I was missing until I found it. You gave me everything I needed, even when I did not know what that was. You gave me love and partnership and adventure. You gave me these beautiful children and this life we have built together. How could I possibly regret that? I just want you to be happy, Owen said softly. I am happy, happier than I ever dreamed possible. And it is all because of you, because you walked into that saloon and saw me when I felt invisible, because you offered me your name when those men wanted to take my dignity, because you have loved me every single day since. I love you, Owen. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. Owen kissed her then, deep and passionate, and she responded with all the love in her heart. They were no longer the desperate young woman and the lonely mountain man who had met in a dusty saloon. They were partners, lovers, parents, friends. They were everything to each other. As the years continued to pass, their children grew into fine young adults. James became a skilled hunter and tracker, with his father's strength and his mother's intelligence. He eventually married a girl from the settlement, the eldest Johnson daughter, and built his own cabin on a piece of land Owen gave him, just a few miles from the family home. Caroline, true to her adventurous nature, shocked everyone by deciding to become a doctor. She left for medical school in San Francisco when she was 18, the first woman from their community to pursue such an education. Owen was terrified to see her go into the wider world alone, but Victoria reminded him that Caroline had inherited his courage and would be just fine. She was right. Caroline excelled in her studies and eventually returned to open a practice in San Jose, where she became known as one of the finest physicians in the region. Thomas followed his father's path, choosing a life in the mountains and building his own homestead near James. Margaret became a teacher, finally fulfilling the dream Victoria had once had for herself, establishing a proper school in the settlement that served all the families in the area. Owen and Victoria watched their children build their own lives with pride and joy, and when grandchildren started arriving, they discovered that being grandparents was just as wonderful as being parents had been. We did well, Owen said one evening when they were both in their 60s, sitting on the porch of the cabin and watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. Their children and grandchildren had just left after a Sunday dinner, the cabin still echoing with the laughter and noise of a large family gathering. We did, Victoria agreed, taking his hand. His hair was more gray than brown now, and her own dark hair was liberally streaked with silver. But his eyes were still the same startling blue, and his hand was still strong and warm in hers. I think about that day in the saloon sometimes, Owen said, how close you came to a very different life, how close I came to riding away without meeting you. But you did not ride away, Victoria said. You walked in at exactly the right moment. You saved me. You saved me too, Owen said. I was turning into stone up here in my mountain, forgetting how to be human. You reminded me what life was supposed to be about. You gave me a reason to come down from the mountain every day. We saved each other, Victoria said. That is what love does. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the forest, an owl hooted. The creek burbled its endless song. The mountains stood eternal around them, cradling their little valley in protective arms. I would do it all again, Owen said softly. Every single moment, every hard winter, every difficult day, every worry and fear. I would do it all again just to end up here with you. So would I, Victoria said. I walked into that saloon looking for survival, and I found everything I never knew I was searching for. I found home. I found love. I found you. Owen pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder as she had done thousands of times over the decades of their marriage. They had built something beautiful together, something that would outlast them in their children and grandchildren and all the generations to come. They had taken a desperate moment and transformed it into a lifetime of love. As the stars brightened overhead and the mountains stood watch around them, Owen and Victoria Kincaid sat together in the home they had built, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and a love that had conquered every obstacle. They had started as strangers, brought together by chance and desperation in a dusty saloon. But they had become so much more than that. They had become partners, lovers, friends, parents, grandparents. They had become everything to each other. And when they finally passed, years later, within months of each other, as long-time married couples sometimes do, they left behind a legacy of love that would continue for generations. Their children told their grandchildren the story of how they met, about the mountain man who saw a woman in trouble and offered her his name instead of letting cruel men turn her into a game. And those grandchildren told their own children, keeping alive the memory of Owen and Victoria Kincaid, who proved that true love could bloom in the most unexpected places and under the most unlikely circumstances. The cabin still stands in that valley between the mountains, maintained by their descendants as a reminder of where it all began. And sometimes, when the sun sets just right and the wind whispers through the pines, it is almost possible to imagine two figures sitting on the porch, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky and being grateful for every moment they had together. Their story had started in a saloon in San Jose, California, in the summer of 1878, when a desperate young woman met a mountain man with a kind heart and a strong sense of justice. It had been a beginning born of necessity and chance, but it had grown into something profound and lasting. They had built a life together in the wild places, raised a family, and created a love story that would be remembered long after they were gone. In the end, that is all anyone can hope for: to love and be loved, to build something meaningful, and to leave the world a little better than you found it. Owen and Victoria Kincaid accomplished all of that and more. And their love had been tested by hardship and strengthened by time, and it had proven that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected encounters. The betting game in that saloon had ended the moment Owen walked through the door. He had given Victoria his name and his protection, asking nothing in return except the chance to prove himself worthy of her trust. And in doing so, he had given her everything she had never known she needed: a home in the mountains, a life of purpose and meaning, children to love and raise, and a partnership that sustained her through every joy and sorrow. Victoria had given him just as much in return. She had taken a man who was slowly turning into a recluse and reminded him of the beauty of human connection. She had filled his cabin with laughter and love, given him children who were his pride and joy, and been his partner in every sense of the word for over 4 decades. Theirs was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West and nurtured in the mountains, a testament to the power of kindness, courage, and the willingness to take a chance on a stranger who might just turn out to be everything you never knew you were looking for. And though they are gone now, their love lives on in the hearts of their descendants and in the story that is still told around fires on cold mountain nights, about the mountain man who saw a woman in trouble and offered her not just his protection, but his entire heart and life. That is how love stories should end, not with uncertainty or questions, but with the certainty that two people found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. Owen and Victoria Kincaid did exactly that, and their legacy is one of love, family, and the enduring truth that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when we choose courage over fear and compassion over indifference. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren still gather at that cabin in the mountains, still tell the story of how it all began, and still marvel at the twist of fate that brought two lonely souls together in a dusty California saloon on a hot July day in 1878. It was the day Victoria's life changed forever, the day Owen found the missing piece of his heart, and the beginning of a love story that proved that real happiness often comes from the places we least expect it. And so their story ends not with tragedy or sorrow, but with the knowledge that they lived fully and loved deeply, that they raised good children who became good adults, and that they created something lasting in a world that too often forgets the power of genuine love and commitment. Owen and Victoria Kincaid found each other in the chaos of the Wild West, chose each other when they could have walked away, and loved each other through every season of a long and beautiful life together. That is the greatest legacy anyone can leave: proof that love exists, that it endures, and that it has the power to transform even the most desperate circumstances into something extraordinary. Their names are carved on twin headstones in a small cemetery near the settlement, under the shadow of the mountains they loved, and the inscription reads simply, "Together in life, together in eternity." It is a fitting tribute to a love that began with an act of kindness and grew into something that would outlast the mountains themselves.